I spent the entire Saturday trying to make that dinner look like something normal families do. I scrubbed the kitchen, set out the good plates, even ironed the tablecloth. I cooked a pot roast the way my grandmother used to slow heavy filling. It wasn't gourmet, but it was real food. I thought maybe if the smell of comfort filled the house, the tension wouldn't. That was my mistake. When the doorbell rang, I already knew who it was. My sister Vanessa walked in first like she owned the place. She was dressed like she was heading to a meeting she'd probably cancel. Heels clicking across the floor louder than her fake high. Behind her, my parents followed Margaret carrying a grocery store pie like she was doing me a favor. Dennis grunting hello without looking up from his phone. They acted like they were visiting strangers, not their own daughter's home. I poured drinks and forced small talk. My dad wanted a beer before he even sat down. My mom complained about traffic and Vanessa stared at her phone half the time. I told myself not to take it personally, but honestly, this was standard operating procedure in my family. Vanessa got the spotlight. I got ignored. Dinner started. Okay. My dad bragged about his golf game. My mom brought up her book club. Vanessa went in about her new venture, which sounded like the same failed startup idea with a new logo. I tried to join in. Mention it a project from work. Nothing crazy, just a budgeting tool I'd pitched to my boss. Before I could finish, my mom cut me off with, "That's nice, Erin. But let's hear more about Vanessa's app." Like clockwork. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, rolling her eyes like she was exhausted from being so special. Investors just don't get my vision," she said. My dad nodded like she was a misunderstood genius. Meanwhile, I sat there with my fork in hand thinking, I fought in Afghanistan. I kept people alive under fire. But sure, let's talk about your fitness app that no one wants. Things shifted fast when my mom casually said, "So, Erin, have you thought about updating the Doyle house yet?" The way she said Doyle house instead of your house was deliberate. My grandparents left it to me when they passed. I knew exactly where this was going. Vanessa perked up immediately. Yeah, it'd be perfect for me. All that space going to waste. She didn't even blink saying it. I set my fork down and said evenly, "It's not going to waste. It's mine." Vanessa leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Come on, Erin. You don't need all that." I'm starting over. "That house would be better with me." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "Grandma and Grandpa left it to me, not you." My dad cleared his throat like he was some kind of referee. "It's a family house, Erin. Maybe you should think about sharing." My mom jumped right in. "Vanessa is in a tough spot. You're doing fine. Why not help her out?" That was the line that did it. I'd been told my whole life I was fine. I didn't need help. Didn't need support. Didn't need attention because I was fine. Meanwhile, everything Vanessa touched turned into a crisis the whole family had to fix. I pushed back in my chair, voice firm. "Fine. I worked for everything I have while you kept handing her whatever she wanted." Vanessa's face darkened. "Don't act superior just because you play soldier and make apps nobody uses." The sting hit harder than I expected, but I held my ground. "At least I don't expect handouts." That silence after was heavy, the kind you only hear before something ugly. Vanessa shoved her chair back so hard it scraped the floor. She came at me fast, her hand cracking across my cheek before I could react. The sting was hot, sharp, humiliating. She grabbed my arm, dug her nails in, and shoved me toward the door like I was some stranger trespassing. "Get out of my house!" she screamed. "My house?" That's what she said. I stumbled backward over the threshold, hit the grass hard enough to scrape my arm. I looked up, waiting for me parents to say something. Anything. They didn't. They just sat there, faces blank, eyes cold. For a second, all I heard was my own breathing. My cheek throbbed, my lip tasted like copper, and the night air bit against the sweat on my neck. The door slammed, the lock clicked, and I was standing in the yard like I didn't belong to them at all. I straightened up, brushing dirt from my sleeve, my arm still burning where she shoved me. The porch light above me hummed, and for a second, it felt like I was back on a night patrol overseas, alone, tense, waiting for the next move. Except this wasn't a combat zone. This was supposed to be family. I walked down the steps slowly, not because I was weak, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me run. My childhood scars and family drama. That never-healed car was parked on the curb, and I sat behind the wheel, gripping it until my knuckles went white. My phone buzzed with a text from Colleen, my old teammate. "You okay?" I typed back one word. "No." My reflection in the rearview mirror looked like hell. Red cheek, dirt in my shirt, eyes wild. But underneath that, there was something else, something steady. I'd been trained to survive worse than this. I'd been trained to never let an ambush take me down. They thought they won by kicking me out. They thought I'd just walk away like always. But I knew better. This wasn't the end of a dinner. This was the start of a mission. My cheek still burned as I drove. The sting of her slap reminding me of something older, something I'd carried since I was a kid. It wasn't just Vanessa's hand on my face. It was every time she got what I didn't. Every time they said she needed more because she was fragile, because she was special, because I was fine. I remembered being 15 and asking for a laptop so I could join a coding camp. My mom sighed and said the budget was tight. A week later, Vanessa got a brand new MacBook for her big ideas. I ended up buying a beat-up Dell with money from boozing tables. The spacebar stuck and the battery barely lasted an hour, but it was mine. At 16, Vanessa got a shiny used Jeep for her birthday. I got a bus pass and the privilege of waking up 2 hours earlier to make it to school. My dad just shrugged. "You're tough, Aaron. You'll manage." That was their mantra for me. You'll manage. By the time I was 18, I figured out what manage meant. It meant my college fund had disappeared into one of Vanessa's doomed projects, a half-baked app that tanked after 4 months. I confronted my parents and my mom mumbled something about unexpected expenses, right? The unexpected expense of throwing money into Vanessa's dumpster fire. When I enlisted, nobody came to Fort Jackson for my basic training graduation. Not one face in the crowd belonged to my family. I remember standing in formation, looking out, hoping maybe my dad would show up. Maybe my mom would wave. Nothing. Later, I found out they were in Houston, cheering Vanessa on as she cut the ribbon for a boutique gym that closed 6 months later. The only people who ever showed up for me were my grandparents, Eleanor and Frank Doyle. My grandma was a retired teacher, sharp as a tack, and my grandpa had served in World War II. They lived in that old house with the creaky porch and the garden out back. To me, it was the only place that felt steady. Gran paused to sit with me on the porch when I was a teenager, watching me tinker with old computers I'd pulled from the junkyard. He'd nod while I explained what I was trying to fix, then tell me stories about how the Army kept equipment running under fire. "You improvise, you adapt, you get it done," he'd say. He was tough but not cruel. Grandma had a way of cutting through my self-doubt. One night after I lost out on a scholarship because I couldn't afford the fees to apply, I sat crying at her kitchen table. She put her hand over mine and said, "They don't see you, Aaron, but we do. You're stronger than their mistakes." Those words stayed with me through deployments, through firefights, through nights when the only thing between me and chaos was training and grit. When my grandparents passed, they left me the house. Vanessa rolled her eyes at the reading of the will and muttered, "Good luck with that. Fixer-upper." My parents didn't argue because they assumed I'd crack and hand it over eventually. What they didn't understand was that the Doyle house wasn't just wood and nails. It was proof that someone in my bloodline believed in me. I put money into repairs. Slowly, the way soldiers patch gear until it works again, I added a security system. I coded myself, upgraded the wiring, kept the garden alive because Grandma loved her roses. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The night after that dinner, I sat in my car outside the house and let the memories hit. The porch light flickered, same as it had for years, and I thought of Grandpa's flag folded in the shadow box inside. He'd given it to me when he come back from Afghanistan, said, "You're carrying the name now. Make it count." Oh, Vanessa's voice still rang a soldier's discipline, turning family betrayal into a mission in my ears. Get out of my house. And it made my blood boil. It wasn't just a slap or a shove. It was 30 years of being erased, dismissed, written off. They thought they could take the last thing that was truly mine. The one thing that tied me to the only people who ever had my back. I thought of being 19 in Kandahar, ducking as rounds cracked overhead, dirt spraying my face. Fear had clenched my gut, but training kicked in. Cover, return fire, move. I survived because I refused to freeze. Sitting there in my car, I realized this was the same thing. Different battlefield, same mission. Hold the line. Protect what's yours. I looked at my hands gripping the steering wheel. They'd carried rifles, patched wounds, dragged buddies out of blast zones. Now they were shaking, not from fear, but from anger. My family had made one thing clear at that dinner. They were never going to stop. They saw the house as theirs by default because Vanessa wanted it. Because they wanted her to have it. Not this time. I leaned back, breathing slow, the way I used to before stepping out on patrol. I wasn't going to let rage cloud me. Rage got you sloppy. What won battles was discipline, planning, execution. Grandma's voice echoed in my head. Don't let their noise drown you out. Grandpa's followed right after. Build your own path, kid. That night I made a decision. This wasn't about sharing or compromise or making peace. It was about finally drawing a line they couldn't cross. They wanted war. Fine, I'd give them one. But it wouldn't be screaming matches or slapped faces. It would be quiet, calculated, and final. The house lights glowed behind me. I thought of Vanessa inside, smug and sure of herself, probably planning how she'd redecorate what she believed was hers. My parents would be right there with her, nodding along, pretending the will didn't exist, pretending my grandparents hadn't made a choice. I turned the key in the ignition and drove off, not toward home, but toward the one person who'd understand what came next. The coffee shop buzzed with chatter and the hiss of the espresso machine as I pushed open the door. Colleen Briggs was already there, leaning back in her chair, boots crossed at the ankles like she still had a rifle propped against her knee. We'd served together in Afghanistan, and nothing about her posture had changed since. She raised her eyebrow the second she saw my face. You look like you went 3 rounds with a brick wall. I dropped into the chair across from her. Family dinner? Colleen snorted. That bad? Worse? Vanessa slapped me, shoved me out the door, screamed it was her house. My parents sat there like I was a stranger. She studied me. Serious now, and the house? My grandparents left it to me. They're circling, waiting for me to give in. They think I'll cave like always. Colleen leaned forward, hands clasped. You remember Kandahar? That ambush outside the market. You didn't freeze then. Don't freeze now. This isn't dinner table drama anymore. Treat it like what it is, an operation. Hell yes. You've got an objective. Keep what's yours. You've got enemies, entitlement, and manipulation. You've got allies. Me, maybe a good lawyer. So what do? You plan. You execute. You win. Hearing her put it in military terms settled something in me. I wasn't just flailing against old family patterns. This was a mission, and I knew how to run missions. I pulled out my notebook, the same battered green one I'd carried overseas, filled with checklists and field notes. I flipped to a blank page, wrote at the top, Mission, protect Doyle House. Colleen grinned. Now you're talking. Break it down. What's your recon? Figure out what they've been doing behind my back. Paperwork, property records, anything they've tried to pull. Intel. She nodded. And your strategy? Lock down the legal side. Find someone who knows the system better than they do. Lawyer. Good. And your weapons? I looked at her deadpan. Paperwork. She laughed. The Army taught us rifles and grenades. Civilian life teaches us contracts and eviction notices. Different ammo, same game. I couldn't help but smile. She was right. If I'd survived firefights by staying calm, checking my corners and trusting my training, I could survive this. We spent the next hour hashing it out like we were prepping for deployment. She threw questions at me, digging into the will, legal truth behind the family property, forcing me to think ahead. What if they hire a lawyer? What if they move fast? What if they try to smear you with the rest of the family? Each time I wrote contingencies. When we were done, I had a rough outline. Gather all documents proving ownership. Research property laws in Texas. Contact a trusted lawyer, someone not afraid of messy family disputes. Collect evidence of their behavior in case things got ugly. Keep emotion out of it. Treat it like a mission, not a grudge match. Colleen tapped the notebook. That's a plan. You stick to it, you win. You go off script, you lose. I stared at the page. My handwriting sharp block letters drilled into me from years of reports. For the first time since that slap, I felt steady. Thanks, she waved it off. Don't thank me. Just don't screw it up. Do. When I left the cafe, the sun had dropped low, turning the sky the color of rust. I slid into my car, opened the notebook again, and traced the words at the top. Mission: protect Doyle House. Status: active. Driving home, I thought about every time I'd folded under their pressure. When they drained my college fund, I swallowed it. When they skipped my graduation, I let it go. When they cheered Vanessa's failures like triumphs, I stayed quiet. That night on the porch with my face still stinging, I realized the biggest mistake I'd made. I let them think silence was surrender. Not anymore. I pulled into my driveway, headlights flashing over the front of the house. The siding was old. The porch light still flickered. The garden needed trimming, but it was mine. They wanted it because it was valuable now. To me, it was valuable because it was proof that I mattered to someone. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, spread out the notebook, and started writing like I was back in the tuck, prepping for a mission brief. Objective: secure the Doyle house. Threats: Vanessa's auntie. Parents' manipulation, possibly Gauls. Assets: will, deed, my service. Discipline: Colleen. Potential legal counsel, course of action, investigate, document, act decisively. Each bullet point I wrote made my pulse slow. Planning meant control. Control meant no surprises. I glanced at the shadow box on the shelf. The folded flag my grandpa gave me. The one he carried from Normandy to Berlin. He told me once, "This flag means you stand your ground. You don't back off because it's easier." I set the flag on the table beside my notes, the weight of it steady. They'd underestimated me for 30 years and maybe I'd let them. But the soldier in me had never disappeared. She was just waiting for the right fight. The Doyle house was that fight. I picked up my pen and underlined the last line of my plant Weiss. No compromise. The next morning, I was up before the sun, notebook open, laptop humming on the kitchen table. If this was going to be a mission, I needed intel. The first file I pulled from my drawer was the will my grandparents left. I remembered the day it was read. Vanessa rolling her eyes, my parents exchanging looks like it was just a technicality. I unfolded the copy and scanned the lines again. Their signatures, 3 witnesses, notarized, dated, plain as day. The house was mine. The language was clear, almost blunt. To her granddaughter, Staff Sergeant Erin Callahan, who showed us loyalty and love. That line always hit me. They didn't say it to be poetic. They said it because it was true. I took pictures of every page, saved digital copies, and backed them up in 3 places. Redundancy wasn't paranoia. It was standard procedure. After locking that down, I went online to check property records. Travis County had them all public. A few clicks and there it was, the Doyle house deed in my name 3 years ago. No liens, no transfers, clean. Which meant if Vanessa was already squatting there like it was her office, she was doing it illegally. I made A-list. Will, airtight, deed, clean, occupants, unauthorized. The last point he underlined. By mid-morning, I had coffee in hand and my phone pressed to my ear, calling a number Colleen had passed along. She's tough, Colleen said. Former JAG knows how to handle messy family fights. The line clicked gathering proof. Emails, lies, and family revenge tactics, and a woman's voice answered, crisp, no nonsense. Diane Mercer, law office. I introduced myself, laid out the basics. Grandparents' house, will in my name, family refusing to accept it, sister physically kicking me out. Diane didn't flinch. Send me the will and deed today, she said. I'll review them by this afternoon. From what you're describing, if they're living there without your permission, they're squatting. Texas law is clear on that. Squatting. The word was ugly, but it was exactly right. I scanned and emailed everything within the hour. When she called back, her tone had the same weight as a commander giving orders. Your documents are airtight. Witnesses. Notarization. No room for contesting. Your grandparents made their intentions very clear. Your parents and sister have no legal standing. They're trespassing, plain and simple. I leaned back in my chair, letting it sink in. For years, I'd been gaslit into thinking I was overreacting, that I was selfish for not handing everything to Vanessa. Hearing a lawyer, Especially a former JAG call it what it was felt like validation. What are my options? I asked. Several. You can issue a formal eviction notice 72 hours under state law, or you can sell outright to a third party and let them handle the eviction. Either way, they have no leverage. I scribbled notes while she spoke. My soldier brain cataloging every detail. Eviction notice, quick, direct sale, final, irreversible. Both ended with the same outcome. Vanessa and my parents out. Diane added, do not engage emotionally. Do not argue with them. Let the paperwork speak. That's your weapon. That part stuck. Paperwork is a weapon. The battlefield was different, but the principle was the same. After the call, I opened my email archives, digging for anything that showed how long they'd been plotting. It didn't take long. 3 months back, my mom had emailed asking about the house's wiring, saying Vanessa needed reliable internet for her startup. My dad had texted about the garage, hinting it'd be perfect for Vanessa's equipment. Those weren't casual questions, they were reconnaissance. They'd been planning this like it was inevitable. I saved everything, labeled folders by date and color-coded them. Evidence package ready to deploy. By the time the afternoon sun lit up the kitchen, I had a binder full of documents. Will, deed, emails, texts. Each piece was a bullet in my arsenal. But it wasn't just about paperwork. It was about drawing a line. I thought back to nights overseas, briefing with my squad before heading out. We'd go over maps, contingencies, escape routes. Shri did this the same way. In my head, I ran scenarios. If they deny the will exists, produce certified copy. If they claim the house is family property, point to deed in my name. If they threaten to sue statute of limitations already closed, every angle I had covered. That night, I called Diane again. If this goes nuclear, what's my worst-case scenario? Her reply was calm, steady. Worst case, they scream, they stall. Maybe they try to drag you through court, but they'll lose. You hold all the cards, Aaron. I hung up and stared at the flag on my wall, the one folded tight in its wooden frame. My grandfather had carried it across Europe in a war that actually mattered. Compared to that, this was a petty skirmish, but it was my skirmish, and I wasn't going to lose it. I opened my notebook one more time and updated my mission log. Intel confirmed. Will airtight, deed clean, legal status secure. The next step was obvious. I wasn't just going to sit on this intel. I was going to use it. I spread the binder open on the table and flipped through the pages until the smell of old printer ink filled the kitchen. Everything Diane had told me was solid, but the soldier in me knew that intel wasn't enough. If you needed proof that could withstand fire, I wasn't going totally on just the will. Indeed, I wanted a record that showed exactly how they had schemed, how they had treated me, and how far they'd gone, assuming I would fold. The first step was digital. I opened my laptop and combed through every text, every email, every voicemail I'd saved. I wasn't surprised at what I found, but seeing it in black and white made my jaw clench. An email from Mom? If you're not using the upstairs rising stakes, when the house value changed everything, Vanessa could turn it into her office. She needs a stable environment. A text from Dad. Garage would be perfect for Vanessa's equipment. Think about letting her set up in there. A string of messages from Vanessa. Stop being selfish. The house should be mine. You don't even know how to use it. I screenshotted everything. Dated and timestamped. The pile grew fast. Then I remembered the dinner. The slap, the shove, the yelling, none of it was just a memory. The little voice in my head, the one trained by years of deployment, had kicked in that night. When Vanessa started raising her voice, I'd slipped my phone onto record and let it run on the table. It wasn't perfect audio, but you could clearly hear her screaming, "Get out of my house!" And you could hear the silence from my parents. That silence was louder than her words. I copied the file, saved it in 3 places, and labeled it primary evidence, dinner recording. With all that stored, I printed hard copies and slid them into protective sleeves in the binder. One section became emails and texts, another audio transcript. Each piece of evidence felt like a sandbag on a flood wall. Layer by layer, the defenses got stronger. I called Diane again. I've got mails, texts, even an audio recording from that night. How much of this is useful? Her tone was almost amused. All of it. Judges like paper trails. And if it doesn't go to court, It still scares off their lawyer. You're not just proving you own the house. You're proving a pattern. That's powerful. That word stuck with me, pattern. The pattern of being ignored, written off, treated like the backup plan in my own family. And now, thanks to their arrogance, I had the receipts. I didn't stop there. I drove by the house one evening, parked across the street, and watched. Through the curtains, I could see Vanessa in the living room, papers scattered across the coffee table, laptop glowing, my house being used as her office. My parents sat in the kitchen eating takeout like they lived there full time. It made my teeth grind, but I stayed put, watching, documenting. I snapped photos from the car, each one a time-stamped shot of them occupying property that wasn't theirs. Later that night, I added them to the binder. Surveillance evidence, unauthorized occupancy. It was clinical, detached, almost military, but that was the point. I wasn't just their daughter anymore or the sister they dismissed. I was the soldier who had finally drawn a line, and I was documenting everything like it was an after-action report. Back at the kitchen table, I looked at the binder, thick now with proof. The cover was plain black, but I slapped a label on the front anyway. Operation Doyle House Case File. For a second, I thought of my squad overseas. How we'd sit in tents, flipping through maps, identifying choke points and fallback positions. This binder felt the same. My map through the mess. My way to keep control when chaos was inevitable. I poured another cup of coffee and kept going, combing through bank records I'd saved from the months after my grandparents died. That's when I saw it. A transfer my parents had made. A new line of credit tied suspiciously close to the property. I didn't have the full details yet, but it smelled like desperation. If they'd leveraged the house for Vanessa's schemes, they weren't just freeloading. They were gambling with something that was never theirs. I made a note to flag it for Diane. When I finally closed the binder, the clock read 2:00 a.m. My kitchen was a mess of paper, highlighters, sticky notes, and empty mugs. But the mission log was clear. Proof collected, certified will and deed. Emails and texts pushing Vanessa into the house. Audio recording of the dinner confrontation. Photos of them living there. Financial records hinting at misuse. That was more than enough ammo for anyone sane. But I wasn't just aiming for sanity. I was aiming for finality. I pushed the binder to the center of the table and rested my hands on it. Steady, the way I'd hold a weapon before stepping out into the field. I thought of Vanessa's face when she realized the game was over. My parents' silence turning into panic. This wasn't revenge for one slap. It was the answer to years of being told I was fine while the package of justice. Soldier's revenge in certified mail. They poured everything into her. It was the moment I stopped being the backup and started being the one in control. I picked up my pen and wrote the last line in my notebook before shutting it for the night. Case file complete, ready for deployment. The binder sat on my table like a loaded weapon. But one line in my notes kept nagging me. Leverage. Proof was strong. Law was on my side. But leverage was what decided how much damage they would take. I opened my laptop again. This time not for emails or bank records, but for something more basic. Property values in Austin. 3 years ago, when my grandparents passed, the Doyle house had been worth about $180,000. Not glamorous, just a modest old house in a neighborhood no one paid much attention to. But now the tech boom had rolled in. Startups flooding the area, housing demand skyrocketing. Zillow nearly made me choke on my coffee. $940,000. Other listings in the block showed offers climbing past that almost $1 million. I leaned back, staring at the screen. That explained everything. Vanessa and my parents weren't just trying to freeload in a family house. They were circling a prize they couldn't afford but didn't want me to keep. They didn't see it as mine. They saw it as their lottery ticket. I scrolled through sale histories, neighborhood maps, tax records. Every arrow pointed in the same direction. The Doyle house had turned into a gold mine and I was sitting on it. That realization snapped the mission into focus. It wasn't enough to evict them. If I left the house in my name, they'd just keep circling, keep making plays, keep pushing. The only way to end it was to remove the asset from the battlefield completely. Sell it, lock it down so they couldn't touch it again. I called Diane. If I sell, what happens? Her answer was sharp, immediate. You end it, clean break. New owners, no loopholes. Your family can scream all they want, but legally it's done. It also means you walk away with cash in hand instead of just peace of mind. Can they stop me? I asked. They can try. But they'll lose. The deed is yours. The will is airtight. Unless you want to keep patching holes in this wall forever. Selling is your nuclear option. I sat with that for a long minute. Nuclear option. I'd seen those decisions overseas when you knew a firefight would keep dragging unless you cut off the enemy's supply line. This felt the same. So, I started running numbers. After taxes, after fees, I'd still walk away with more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Enough to buy my own place outright. Enough to start over on my terms. That night I called Colleen. I'm selling. She didn't hesitate. Good. Soldiers don't babysit occupied territory. We secure. We move on. With that decided, the next step was finding a buyer. I didn't want some corporate developer bulldozing my grandparents' garden into condos. I wanted the place to go to people who would actually value it. Through a contact at work, I met the Mitchell, a young couple with 2 kids, looking for a place to grow roots in Austin. They'd fallen in love with the porch, Pharisees, even the squeaky floorboards. When we sat down to talk, they looked me straight in the eye. "We want a home," Mr. Mitchell said. "Not an investment project." That mattered. It mattered because I could picture my grandmother smiling at the thought of kids running through her garden again. I signed the paperwork with steady hands, the ink sinking into the page like a final order issued. The house was sold. It wasn't just a transaction. It was leverage turned into closure. The Mitchells promised to keep the garden alive, and I believed them. Diane handled the contracts, triple-checking every clause, making sure no one in my family could contest the sale. "You're ironclad," she told me. "They can scream, but legally they're squatters about to be evicted by the new owners." All the mission log in my notebook got a new line. Asset sold, enemy cut off, status irreversible. For the first time in weeks, I slept, but it wasn't relief. It was anticipation. I knew what was coming. The next morning, I drove by the Doyle house again. The porch looked the same, but I saw it differently now. It wasn't mine anymore, not technically. Soon, the Mitchell kids would be playing there, their bikes leaning against the fence. My family didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath them had already shifted. I parked for a while, watching through the family drama explodes, 45 missed calls and desperate voices curtains. Vanessa was pacing, phone to her ear, her laptop glowing. My parents moved around the kitchen like it was their kingdom. They were still playing house in a place they didn't own. And that made my chest tighten, not with anger, but with something colder. They were walking into a trap they didn't even see. I drove away without honking, without stopping. They'd find out soon enough. Back at my place, I opened the binder and added the signed contract to the front. It slid into the sleeve with a satisfying snap. Everything was lined up now. Proof, evidence, legal counsel, and the sale. The battlefield was ready. The last thing I did before shutting the binder was pick up my pen and write in the margin of my notebook. Mission phase complete. Prepare package. The decision was locked. The next move wasn't about gathering or planning. It was about delivery. The contract with the Mitchells still smelled like fresh ink when I pulled it from the binder. Holding it in my hands felt like carrying a weapon loaded and ready. All that was left now was deployment. I called Diane and she walked me through the plan one more time like it was a mission brief. Certified copies of the will, the deed, the signed sale contract, and the eviction notice, she said. 72 hours to vacate. Once they open this package, it's game over. No arguments, no excuses. Her voice was calm, steady, and absolutely certain. That kind of certainty was fuel. I laid each document out on the table, lining them up in perfect order. First, the will signed, witnessed, notarized. Then, the deed, proof of ownership. Then, the sale contract with the Mitchells, notarized, and recorded. And finally, the eviction notice, short and sharp, a legal grenade, ready to blow their illusion apart. I slid each page into the envelope like I was loading magazines into a pouch. Will, deed, contract, notice, sealed, and final. The post office was nearly empty when I walked in. The clerk barely looked up until I slid the envelope across the counter and said, "Certified mail, signature required." He glanced at the return address, then at me. then stamped it with a heavy thud. That sound might as well have been artillery fire. "Delivery guaranteed," he said. "Good." Back in my car, I sat for a moment with the receipt in my hand. I'd done patrols where the risk of ambush was higher than the chance of making it back. But I hadn't felt adrenaline like this in years. Not fear, not even anger, just the steady rush of knowing a plan was locked, and nothing could stop the chain of events already set in motion. I opened my notebook and updated the log. Phase 2, package deployed, status en route. For the next day or two, I forced myself to focus on routine, gym, errands, meal prep. I stayed off social media, ignored calls from relatives, and kept my eyes forward. But every time I looked at the receipt tucked in the binder, I felt the clock ticking down. By the third evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Diane. Confirmed. Delivered. Signed by Margaret. So that was it. My mom had opened the door, taken the envelope, and signed for the legal notice that was about to rip their fantasy apart. I could picture the scene inside the three of them gathered around the kitchen table, expecting another bill or junk mail, then staring as the truth landed in their hands. The will they ignored, the sale contract they didn't see coming, the eviction notice with 72 hours stamped across it, their kingdom crumbling with a single rip of paper. But picturing wasn't enough. I wanted confirmation, not because I doubted Diane, but because I knew them. They'd call, they'd yell, they'd panic. And sure enough, within an hour, my phone lit up. First Mom, 20 missed calls in a row. Then Dad, just one short and gruff. Then Vanessa, voicemail after voicemail full of venom. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. This was part of the operation. Draw them out. Let them reveal themselves while I stayed silent. By midnight, the counter hit 45 missed calls. I scrolled through them like I was flipping through after-action reports. Every call was proof of impact, evidence the strike had landed. Finally, I texted back 3 words. Get out now. The silence that followed was almost legal battle. How a soldier outsmarted family betrayal funny. For the first time in my life, I wasn't explaining, defending, or begging to be heard. I was issuing orders. Sitting there staring at my phone, I realized how strange it felt to not be the one on defense. I wasn't dodging or absorbing blows. I was in control and they knew it. The next morning, I grabbed a coffee and checked my voicemail, not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted the record. My mom's voice was frantic, pitching higher with each call. It was a mistake, Aaron. We didn't mean it. You can't do this to us. My dad's tone was low, like a man trying to sound authoritative but out of ammo. We need to talk now. And then there was Vanessa. You're not getting away with this, she screamed. You think you can just sell the house? You think you can throw us out? You're going to regret this? I saved them all, downloaded each message, labeled and stored them in the binder under a new tab. Phase 2, reaction evidence. If this ever went before a judge, it would show exactly how they responded when confronted with reality. But even without a courtroom, it meant something. For the first time, the balance had shifted. The same people who sat there cold and silent while I was shoved out the door were now calling me nonstop, desperate, terrified, powerless. That was leverage. That night, I flipped through the binder again. Every page felt heavier than it was, like the paper carried not just ink, but years of neglect and betrayal finally being accounted for. I closed it gently, not out of care, but because the mission was running smoothly. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't rage. This was order. The house was sold. The eviction notice was delivered. The calls had come in frantic and empty. The operation wasn't theory anymore. It was live. I picked up my notebook, pen scratching across the pages. I updated the log. Package confirmed, delivered. Enemy response, panic, status, on track. Then I set the pen down, leaned back, and let the quiet of the room settle in around me. For once, the silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't loaded with disappointment or dismissal. It was the sound of a soldier holding the field, steady, waiting for the next move that would come, whether they liked it or not. The morning after the package landed, my phone looked like it was under attack. Notifications stacked up in red numbers across the screen, buzzing so often the vibration rattled the table. I scrolled through the log, Each call stamped with my mother's name, then my father's, then Vanessa's. By the time I set the phone down, the count hit 45. I brewed coffee like nothing unusual was happening. The smell of roasted beans filled the kitchen while my voicemail inbox kept filling. When I finally pressed play, the first message nearly made me laugh out loud. Mom's voice was shaky, frantic. "Aaron, sweetheart, please. This has gone too far. We didn't mean it. It was just a fight. Don't do this to your family." She sounded like the same woman who told me I was fine when she handed everything to Vanessa. Only now she was begging. The next message was my dad flat and clipped. "We need to talk right now. Don't ignore me." He used the same tone he'd used when I was 10 and forgot to take out the trash. Like this was still about obedience instead of ownership. Then came Vanessa, voice shrill with rage. "You think you're smart? Selling the house behind our backs. That's my future you just destroyed. You're not getting away with this, Aaron." I hit save on each message, dragging them into labeled folders on my laptop. Reaction evidence, voicemails. They wanted to bury me in noise, but all they were doing was creating a record of panic. By mid-afternoon, the calls slowed, replaced by texts. Mom sent walls of pleading paragraphs. "We can fix this. Just cancel the sale. Vanessa is struggling. Be reasonable." Dad's texts were shorter. "Call me." Vanessa's were venom. "Traitor, you're dead to us." I typed out a reply, 3 words only. "Get out now." No exclamation marks, no explanation, just an order. For once, I wasn't the one on defense. That silence after I hit send was better than any argument I could have made. No text came back immediately. No call broke through in the collapse. Family revenge story hits hard with bankruptcy the next hour. They had no counter. I poured another cup of coffee and thought about how familiar this felt. Not the drama, but the rhythm. Overseas, we'd execute a strike, then wait for the enemy's reaction. You could measure success by how frantically they scrambled. The more chaotic their response, the cleaner your hit. By that measure, this mission was textbook. Still, the soldier in me never underestimated. Desperate people made reckless moves. I pulled the binder back onto the table, checked every document, every folder on my laptop. Will, deed, sale, contract, eviction notice, voicemails, screenshots, photos. The case file wasn't just strong, it was airtight. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, phone buzzing on the nightstand. I didn't pick up. Instead, I thought about the dinner, the sting of Vanessa's hand, the cold eyes of my parents. The silence they gave me that night had spoken volumes, and now their desperation spoke louder. In the morning, Diane called. "They've been blowing up my office too. Your mother left 3 messages claiming there's been a mistake." Vanessa tried to sound threatening, but the documents speak for themselves. "You're secure." Her voice was so matter-of-fact it almost felt anticlimactic. Almost. I asked what's next. "Sheriff's office enforces the eviction if they resist. The Mitchells take possession in a few weeks. At this point, the law is a hammer and your family is the nail. There's nothing they can do but move out." I thanked her and hung up, feeling the weight of those words settle in. For years, I'd been the one compromised, overlooked, written off. Now they were the ones trapped in a corner, and every move they made only dug the hole deeper. Around noon, I went for a run through the neighborhood, my feet pounding the pavement, lungs pulling in the humid Texas air. Neighbors waved, some smiled, a couple nodded knowingly. They'd seen the Doyle house occupied by people who didn't belong there. They knew the truth even without the paperwork. It reminded me that this wasn't just about me. It was about respect for my grandparents, for the life they built, for the legacy they chose to leave with me. When I circled back home, sweat dripping down my neck, my phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. Vanessa this time, her voice cracking. "You've ruined me, Aaron. Do you even care? Where am I supposed to go?" I stood in my kitchen listening to it on speaker, then hit save without hesitation. For once, her crisis wasn't mine to fix. The afternoon sun lit up the binder on my table, the bold label staring back. Operation Doyle House case file. I flipped it open and slid the voicemail transcript into the sleeve. The binder was thick now, almost too heavy for its size. Each page a weight my family had stacked on themselves. I closed it gently and set it aside. The way you'd set down a weapon after confirming the field was clear. The mission wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. The evidence was in place, the law was on my side. And their panic was proof of impact. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter, the backup soldier, the one expected to manage. I felt like the operator holding the ground, calm and steady, while the other side crumbled under pressure they couldn't withstand. The next strike came faster than I expected. 2 days after the eviction notice was delivered, Diane forwarded me an email from a lawyer named Paul Grayson. He introduced himself with all the slickness of someone who thought a polished signature block could make up for a weak case. My clients, he wrote, believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the ownership of the Doyle property. As the house is a family asset, they intend to contest the recent actions taken by Miss Creed. Callahan. I almost laughed. Contest. After 3 years, with the will already filed, witnessed, notarized, and immune from challenge under Texas law, he might as well have told me Vanessa was launching a new app that would cure cancer. I called Diane. So what's the move? Her tone was clipped, confident. I'll respond formally, citing statute and attaching the certified documents. But if you'd like, you can call him yourself and shut this down directly. I thought about it for a second. Overseas, we didn't leave everything to intermediaries. Sometimes you looked the enemy right in the eye so they knew exactly who beat them. Send me his The Price of Revenge, soldier's loneliness and PTSD number, I said. When Grayson picked up, his voice oozed with that half-friendly, half-condescending lawyer tone. Staff Sergeant Callahan, thank you for speaking with me. I believe we can resolve this amicably if you'll consider rescinding the sale. I cut him off. The will names me sole heir. The deed is in my name. The sale is signed, notarized, and recorded. And under Texas law, your window to contest the will closed 3 years ago. You're too late, counselor. There was a pause. Then Hettried again. Well, perhaps we can. No, I said flatly. There's nothing to negotiate. Tell Vanessa and my parents to pack. The silence on the line told me everything. He knew it was over. That night, Diane emailed me again. Grayson has backed off. They don't have a case. The eviction clock is still ticking. And 3 days later, Vanessa posted a long rant on social media, calling me a traitor, a thief, and a heartless soldier who abandoned her family for money. It didn't take long for cousins and aunts to start texting me, parroting her side of the story. I didn't argue. Instead, I forwarded them the will and the sale contract. Within hours, most of them went silent. The truth was ascalpel, precise, cutting, undeniable. Meanwhile, Diane updated me on logistics. If they're not out within 72 hours, the sheriff enforces the eviction. The Mitchells will be handed the keys in just over 2 weeks. Legally, this is locked. I nodded as if she could see me through the phone. Good. I want this finished clean. The following week, I was in uniform at Fort Cavazos, finishing a training session with my unit when my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail, this time from Dad. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of bluster. You've gone too far, Aaron. You don't understand what you've done. I saved it, filed it, and got back to training. Every call, every message they sent me only strengthened my resolve. They weren't fighting for family. They were fighting for property they'd already lost, and I wasn't about to be their bailout plan again. Diane called one last time with the update that sealed everything. Grayson officially withdrew. Your family has no legal representation. The eviction stands. The Mitchells' move-in is scheduled. It wasn't just a win. It was decisive, final, irreversible. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a beer in hand, binder open to the very first page. My grandparents' will. I traced the line with my finger. To our granddaughter, Staff Sergeant Aaron Callahan, who showed us loyalty and love. For 3 decades, I'd been the one dismissed, overlooked, treated like a placeholder. But this line, this moment, made it clear. I was the one who carried their legacy forward, not the family who tried to erase me. I closed the binder, the snap of the cover echoing in the quiet room. The final battle had been fought and won, not with fists or shouting, but with law, evidence, and discipline. The house was no longer contested ground. It was secured territory, handed off to new owners who would treat it with respect. My family could rage, plead, or sulk, but none of it mattered. The field was mine, and they were out. No rescue was coming for them this time. No compromise, no second chances, just the clean silence of victory. The victory didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like silence. A silence so heavy it pressed against the walls while my family unraveled in plain sight. The first hit landed on Vanessa. Her startup had already been sinking, bleeding money with every unpaid loan. The moment word spread that she'd lost her office and her future inheritance, creditors smelled blood. Calls turned into demands. Demands turned into possessions. Her leased car was the first to go. Then her bank accounts froze. Within weeks, she was evicted from her fancy downtown apartment and dragging suitcases into a shared unit with strangers. I didn't stalk her life, but news traveled fast in Austin. A friend forwarded me screenshots of her ranting online about being betrayed by blood and losing everything to greed. By the end of the month, those posts went quiet. Rumor was she was working part-time at a coffee shop, latte art replacing her CEO title. My parents fared no better. Their house of cards collapsed the moment the Doyle property slipped through their fingers. 2 years earlier, they'd refinanced their own home to funnel money into Vanessa's doomed app. With no equity left and no bailout from me, they couldn't keep up. The foreclosure notice was public record, splashed on neighborhood forums like Rebirth After Family Drama. A soldier's new mission begins local gossip. Chapter 7. Bankruptcy followed, stripping them bare. Their suburban home, the one they paraded as proof of success, was gone. They moved into a cramped rental apartment near the edge of town, the kind of place they used to mock when we drove past. The social fallout was worse than the financial. Mom's book club stopped inviting her. Dad's golf buddies suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The same people who'd laughed at Vanessa's jokes and nodded at my parents' stories now kept their distance, not wanting to get too close to the stench of failure. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel joy either. What I felt was clarity. For decades, they'd acted like their choices had no cost. Now, the costs had come due, and they were paying every cent. One afternoon, Colleen sat across from me at a diner, scrolling through her phone. "You've seen this?" she asked, tilting the screen toward me. It was a thread on a local forum. Neighbors discussing the foreclosure. Some defended my parents, but most just shook their heads. One line stuck out. "Funny how they always bragged about stability and now they're the ones sinking." Colleen smirked. "Karma works fast sometimes." I sipped my coffee steady. Actions have consequences. Always have. That night I walked past the Doyle house one last time. The Mitchell kids' bikes leaned against the porch. Fresh curtains hung in the windows. Roses bloomed in the garden, bright and defiant. It didn't feel like my house anymore. And that was the point. It was alive again, filled with new stories, not haunted by the old ones. Back home, I checked my voicemail. Vanessa's voice cracked through the speaker. "You've ruined me, Aaron. I have nothing. Are you happy now?" I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because no answer mattered. She wasn't ruined by me. She was ruined by entitlement, by years of being propped up with my parents' blind loyalty. I'd simply removed the crutch. Mom's text came next, pleading, "We can fix this. We're still family. Don't shut us out." Dad sent one last message. "You've gone too far." I saved them all. Not out of sentiment, but for the record. At work, things felt different, lighter. My unit joked that I walked like I'd won a private war. Maybe I had. They didn't know the details, but they saw the change. The way I carried myself, the way I didn't flinch when the phone buzzed. Rebecca, a fellow vet I trusted, raised her glass one night at a bar downtown. "To freedom," she said, clinking it against mine. I thought about the word. Freedom wasn't just walking away from a battlefield. It was walking away knowing you'd secured the ground that no one could drag you back. Meanwhile, Vanessa's spiral deepened. Her social circle shrank. The friends who once cheered for her startup disappeared when the money did. She went from posting motivational quotes to radio silence. If not for whispers from mutual acquaintances, I wouldn't have known she was still in town. My parents weren't any better off. Neighbors who once waved now turned away. The foreclosure story stuck like glue, marking them as reckless and careless. Dad stopped showing up to community events. Mom, from what I heard, rarely left the apartment. Their collapse wasn't dramatic like in movies. No screaming headlines, no staged confrontations, just the slow grind of reality closing in, stripping away every illusion they'd built. And I didn't step in, not once because I finally understood. Every time I had bailed them out in the past, every time I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping the peace, I had only delayed this outcome. They had built their own collapse. Brick by brick, lie by lie, choice by choice. All I had done was refuse to carry their weight anymore. The Doyle house stood alive and thriving while their world fell apart. That contrast said it all. By the end of the month, I updated the final page of my mission notebook. Phase complete. Family collapse confirmed. Status outcome secured. I closed the book, tucked it into the binder, and set it aside. For once, I didn't need to plan the next move. The battlefield was quiet, and E was still standing. The aftermath didn't come with a parade. It came with silence. A silence so sharp it cut deeper than Vanessa's slap ever had. I'd won on paper, in court, in the eyes of the law. But the victory had a weight I hadn't prepared for. Nights got longer. I'd sit in my apartment, binder tucked away, the phone blessedly quiet for the first time in months, no screaming voicemails, no manipulative texts, just stillness. And that stillness had a way of turning on me. Some nights I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, the old nightmares back, the ones from Afghanistan, the echo of mortar fire, the choking dust, the endless hum of helicopters. Except this time the faces mixed. Vanessa yelling, my mother's cold stare, my father's silence, my squad's voices calling for cover. My brain blended them together into one looping reel of betrayal and chaos. In the morning, I'd lace up my boots and run until my lungs burned. The pavement under my feet was steady, something I could control when everything else felt fractured. But even then, the loneliness followed me like a shadow. Colleen noticed first. She came by one night with takeout, slamming it on my kitchen table like we were back in the barracks. "You look like hell," she said. No sugarcoating. "Thanks," I muttered, tearing into the food anyway. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Ewan, Aaron, you need to let yourself feel it." End quote. I shook my head. I didn't win. I just cut ties. Now there's nothing left. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "You knew this was the cost. Every mission has one. This was yours." She was right. I'd planned every detail like an operation: evidence, lawyers, contracts, eviction. What I hadn't planned for was the silence afterward. The absence of family, even a toxic one, left a hole. Work helped. Training new recruits, leading drills, running field exercises. It reminded me of my purpose. But when the day ended and I came home to four walls and no one waiting, the quiet screamed. One weekend, I pulled out the old wooden box me grandfather left me. Inside was his flag, folded tight, edges crisp. Beneath it, a photo of him and my grandmother standing in front of the Doyle house, smiling, arms around each other. They'd believed in me when no one else did. They'd chosen me, and I'd honored that by protecting what they left. But the photo made my chest ache, because even as I protected their legacy, I'd lost mine. Mom hadn't reached out again since the foreclosure. Dad stayed silent. Vanessa, from what I heard, was barely scraping by. Still angry, still blaming me, and I didn't care enough to fix it. That's when the weight of it all hit. I was free, yes, but I was also alone. PTSD doesn't just come from battlefields overseas. Sometimes it comes from the wars you fight at home. The betrayals, the manipulation, the years of carrying more than your share. My body carried it the same way. My jaw tight at night, my fists clenched without realizing, my breath shallow when I thought about family dinners. I went to the VA one morning, sat in the waiting room with other vets, most of them younger, some older. We all looked the same, worn, tired, carrying ghosts. When my turn came, I told the counselor the truth. Not just about Afghanistan, but about the slap at dinner, the eviction notice, the silence after. She nodded, jotting notes. You cut ties. That's survival. But survival isn't the same as living. That line stuck with me. Back at home, I sat on my porch. My porch, not my parents', not Vanessa's, and let the Texas heat wash over me. I thought about what it meant to live, not just survive. Colleen called that night, her voice a mix of stern and kind. You don't have to carry this alone. We carried rucksacks heavier than this overseas. You remember what we always said? I smiled faintly. Distribute the weight. Exactly. So, stop acting like you're the only one who can hold it. I didn't argue. I just listened because maybe she was right. The binder was closed, the house gone, the family scattered, the operation was complete. But the cost, the loneliness, the PTSD, the silence, that was the part no paperwork could solve. And as I sat there in the fading light, flag folded on the table beside me, I realized this was the hardest mission of all. Not revenge, not eviction, not legal battles, learning how to live with what was left. The first thing I bought after the dust settled wasn't a car or a fancy trip. It was a house. Small, one-story, tucked on a quiet street in Austin. Nothing dramatic, nothing showy, just mine. Paid for in cash from the sale. No banks, no debts, no one else's name on the deed. When I turned the key for the first time, the lock clicked like a final door closing behind me. The living room was bare at first, just beige walls and empty floors, but I knew exactly how I wanted to fill it. On the mantel, I placed the folded flag my grandfather left me, corners sharp as if he'd folded it himself yesterday. Next to it, I set a photo of him and my grandmother in their garden, the one I'd pulled from the old box. Their smiles filled the room more than furniture ever could. In the backyard, the soil was dry and stubborn, but I spent a weekend turning it over, sweat dripping, hands blistered. I planted rows of red poppies, the kind my grandmother loved, the kind I'd seen overseas blooming through cracked earth. By the time I finished, my knees ached. But when I stood back and looked at the tiny green shoots breaking through, something shifted inside me. For the first time in months, maybe years, it felt like I was planting for myself, not defending something from someone else. The house wasn't just shelter. It was a reset. With the extra money, I finally chased an idea I'd carried since deployment. Veterans always struggled with tech after service paperwork, benefits, resumes, even basic computer skills. I knew the frustration firsthand, and I'd seen too many good soldiers stumble because of it. So I launched a small project teaching technology to veterans. At first, it was just a folding table in the community center, my laptop hooked to a projector. A handful of vets showed up, skeptical, arms crossed, like I was about to bore them with spreadsheets. But then, it showed them how to set up VA accounts online, how to write resumes that didn't sound like combat reports, how to use budgeting apps that kept their bills on track. Their faces changed, shoulders eased, some even laughed. Word spread fast. Within months, the folding table turned into a regular program. Local vets called it Aaron's Boot Camp for Tech. I just called it Payback the Good Kind. Payback to the ones who understood what it meant to carry weight no one else saw. Colleen came to one session, leaning against the back wall, grinning as I helped a 60-year-old Marine figure out email attachments. Never thought I'd see Staff Sergeant Callahan teaching PowerPoint, she teased afterward. I shrugged, smiling for real this time. Better than babysitting my sister's fake startup. The laugh that followed wasn't bitter. It was clean, light, the kind I hadn't heard from myself in years. At night when I sat on my porch, the flag lit by a soft lamp inside and the poppies swaying outside, I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The slap at dinner, the silence from my parents, the eviction notices, the phone calls, the collapse. It had all been ugly, brutal, and final. But it had led me here to quiet that didn't suffocate to a mission that wasn't about revenge anymore, but about building something. Neighbors waved when they saw me, not because of family gossip or lawsuits, but because I was just Aaron, the vet with the new house in the garden. They didn't know the details. They didn't need to. I never unblocked my parents' numbers. Vanessa's voice never reached my voicemail again. The past stayed where it belonged. Behind closed doors I'd locked for good. What I carried forward was what mattered. My grandparents' faith, my squad's discipline, my own resolve. On the anniversary of buying the house, I stood in the garden, poppies in full bloom, reed against the Texas Sunday. I saluted the flag on the mantel inside, then lowered my hand and let the silence stretch. No battles, no shouting, no calls to ignore, just peace. And for the first time, I realized I hadn't just survived my family's betrayal. I had completed the mission my grandparents trusted me with. Protecting what was mine, drawing the line, starting new. Mission complete. Looking back, it's strange how something as simple as a family dinner could detonate into a war that changed everything. That night when Vanessa's hand cracked across my face and my parents just sat there, I thought the sting was the worst part. Turns out it was the silence. The years of being ignored, dismissed, sacrificed so she could be propped up. That silence was the real wound. But here's the truth I learned. Silence can cut both ways. When I finally stopped answering their calls, when I stopped defending myself, stopped begging for recognition, that silence became power. For once, they had to sit with it, and it broke them in ways no argument ever could. I didn't fight with fists or even with words. I fought with discipline, with paperwork, with the kind of patience the army drilled into me, the kind of resolve my grandparents taught me in their garden. Every email I saved, every voicemail I filed, every signature on those contracts, it was all part of the same mission, holding the line. Yes, I lost a family. Or maybe I finally admitted I never really had one. What I gained, though, was something harder to come by freedom. Not the flag-waving kind you see in parades, but the quiet kind. The freedom of walking into a house that's mine alone. Of planting poppies in the dirt without someone waiting to take the harvest. Of building something that can't be stolen because it comes from. There are nights I still wake up to old echoes, boots pounding, mortars hitting, or just Vanessa's voice in my ear. PTSD doesn't ask if you've moved on. It just shows up. But now when I open my eyes, I see the flag on my mantle and the garden outside. And I remind myself I made it here. I held the line. I didn't cave. I don't know if my parents still talk about me. I don't know if Vanessa's still blaming me while steaming milk for someone else's latte. And I don't care. Their choices caught up to them. Mine carried me forward. My grandparents once told me, "Your worth isn't their approval." It took me years, a war, and a family implosion to really believe that. But I believe it now. The Doyle house is gone. My old life with it. What's left is leaner, lonelier sometimes, but stronger. It's mine. And when I say mission complete, I don't mean revenge. I mean survival, honor, and finally living on my own terms.